With a market cap of just $150 billion, SpaceX is a lightweight next to the trillion-dollar big tech giants. But this relatively unremarkable size belies the power controlled by this privately held company. In this video, I will show how this fairly inconspicuous company has built an unprecedented web of global impact and power that could well make it the most important company of our time. If you enjoy the video, please take a second to like and subscribe to the channel for global content on how business, politics, and history interact in the course of economic development. Founded in 2002, SpaceX is a company with aspirations that are simply out of this world. Their mission states that they are dedicated to making humanity multiplanetary. But in the meantime, SpaceX has done well for itself on planet Earth by leveraging the core businesses of rockets and satellite internet. SpaceX has come a long way from its founding in 2002 with the unlikely goal of privatizing space exploration. The timing was fortuitous because SpaceX came to maturity just as NASA was ending its space shuttle program in 2011. This created a period of opportunity as the US was reluctantly relying on Russian rockets for crewed missions. SpaceX stepped in to fill this gap with some good old American rockets, collecting a total of $15.3 billion in contracts and subsidies from the US government in the process. Subsidies or not, SpaceX's ability to break into an industry that was previously the preserve of national government agencies is of great symbolic importance for the future of space exploration. The national model of space was always limited by political and economic considerations that could not sustain consistent progress, as demonstrated by the shutdown of NASA's space shuttle program in 2011 without a viable replacement in the pipeline. In theory, private space exploration could guarantee long-term and consistent progress because the companies must operate business models that are sustainable and hopefully profitable. And this is what SpaceX has done. Without the unlimited funds of a national agency, SpaceX has had to innovate its rockets significantly to make them more cost-effective. The crowning achievement being the development of reusable rocket launchers. Today, Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy are the only functional, partially reusable systems in the world. Starship, the largest rocket ever built with 10 times the capacity of Falcon 9, is in advanced stages of testing to become the first fully reusable system in the world. The key parameter for measuring cost effectiveness is satellite cost to payload mass ratio, which is measured in dollars per kilogram of payload. That's a mouthful, I know. Falcon 9, the reusable workhorse of SpaceX's fleet, has a capacity of 15,600 kilograms when delivering to low Earth orbit, and a cost to payload ratio of $5,000 per kilogram. No competitor comes close to that ratio. Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company, is far behind. Their New Glenn rocket is still in development and there are no published numbers to compare with. Virgin Orbit, which has now gone into bankruptcy, had a best case ratio of $24,000 per kilogram, and that is close to the norm for the rest of the industry. Competitors with the closest ratios tend to be operating much smaller rockets. For example, ABL Systems, a startup in California, is developing a system with a ratio of $9,000 per kilogram, which is pretty good, but it is also almost double SpaceX's cost ratio. And not to mention, they can only carry about 1,300 kilograms to low Earth orbit, and that's less than 10% of Falcon 9's capacity. All these capacity and cost advantages are likely to compound when the fully reusable Starship comes online. Given the technical and economic superiority SpaceX has achieved, it is not surprising that they enjoy what we'll call a comfortable dominance of the rocket launch market, for the sake of politeness. Out of a total of 94 orbital rocket launches in 2022 from the US, Europe, Japan, and Korea, 60 were Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets. That is to say, SpaceX was responsible for almost 2/3 of rocket launches in the Western Alliance. Russia and China have growing capacity, but they are not feasible options for Western military and private missions, for obvious reasons. This dependence on SpaceX is likely to increase when the fully reusable Starship comes into service. Starship will be able to carry 150,000 kilograms of load to low Earth orbit. That is almost 10 times the capacity of Falcon 9 and about 4 times that of Falcon Heavy. As the chart indicates, there are competitors in space, but SpaceX has maintained constant dominance for the past few years. Until someone figures out how to compete with SpaceX's capacity and satellite cost to payload mass ratio, SpaceX will remain the undisputed champion. In turn, this market dominance of cargo and crewed flights has resulted in a client list including NASA, the US Space Force, German intelligence, the Italian Space Agency, the European Space Agency, the Korean Army, and a laundry list of other governmental and private entities. In short, some geopolitical heavy hitters. It is here that SpaceX morphs from mere business to international power broker. Being the primary provider of an essential service to some of the most powerful governments in the world comes with significant cachet. It places SpaceX in a position to impact the national security objectives of several countries. We'll come back to this point later in the video. While SpaceX's unique stranglehold over such a strategically important industry is impressive in its own right, it is only the first half of a very powerful double act. Someone at SpaceX clearly saw all the rocket capacity they had built up, did a little thinking, and realized that rockets are pretty good transport for satellites. So they got into the satellite business. Enter Starlink. Starlink is a satellite internet constellation designed to provide high-speed internet to almost any location in the world without a wired connection. On the consumer end, one just needs a router and satellite dish that connects to the satellite constellation. It is currently operational in just over 60 countries, with plans for continued rapid expansion over the next few years. Before you rush to the comments to tell me that satellite internet is old news, remember, this is not your grandparents' satellite internet. This is so drastically different that initial proposals of the systems were dismissed as impractical. Starlink operates satellites in low Earth orbit, which can be as low as 340 kilometers from the Earth's surface, as opposed to the traditional geostationary orbit satellites, which are generally at 36,000 kilometers from the Earth. This distance has a drastic impact on speed. It currently has a functional fleet of 4,500 satellites. For context, there are about 8,900 satellites in low Earth orbit right now. In fact, Starlink has FCC approval to deploy 12,000 first-generation satellites. They also have approval for an additional 7,500 second-generation satellites, leading to an approved total of almost 20,000 satellites. Notwithstanding, the company actually plans to top out at a total of 42,000 satellites in space. It goes without saying that Starlink benefits from SpaceX's dominance of rocket launches. They have spun their transport advantage into a satellite internet advantage. The result is that with only a dish and a router, one should be able to access high-speed internet from anywhere in the world. And that is not where the technical advances end. Starlink is such a drastic advancement of satellite internet, it could pose a legitimate challenge to fiber for many use cases. Beyond positioning in low Earth orbit, the satellites are also able to use laser technology to communicate among themselves and create a network that is faster than undersea fiber over longer intercontinental distances. This innovation was introduced in the transition from version 1 to version 1.5. With each version, Starlink has also been able to add bandwidth, meaning each satellite can service more users. The new version 2 minis which began shipping on February 27, 2023, have 4 times the capacity of version 1 satellites, while being marginally bigger. These V2 minis come with new capabilities that could supercharge utility. The satellites will be able to connect directly to mobile phones without need for a receiver and router. This will revolutionize mobile data and be the end of spotty mobile service in remote areas. If deployed globally, Starlink could tap into partnerships with cell service providers everywhere to form a global Uber network. Imagine having data on your phone all over the world just because you're a Starlink subscriber. The first such program was rolled out in the US in partnership with T-Mobile, while a similar service is also starting in Japan in partnership with KDDI, a major network provider in that country. The full V2 satellites will be even more powerful, but at an estimated weight of 1,200 kilograms each, they will only roll out when the almighty Starship comes into service. For context on rocket capacity, Falcon 9 currently carries 60 V1 satellites at a time, about 55 V1.5s, and about 22 V2 minis. Starship, on the other hand, will be able to carry up to 125 full V2 satellites, or up to 700 V1s in just one trip. With this kind of exponential growth in the underlying technology, bandwidth capacity per satellite, and delivery capability, it is feasible to think that SpaceX at full capacity will be able to service hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. All this satellite and delivery mechanism innovation is designed to achieve one thing: widespread access. Over 40% of the global population does not have stable access to the internet. That means, cost aside, the addressable market for Starlink runs into the billions. On the subject of cost, Starlink appears to be using price differentiation to be competitive in lower income markets like Mozambique, Kenya, and Nigeria, where the monthly cost of a Starlink subscription is roughly $40, just a third of the US price of $120. This makes the service extremely competitive with local broadband offerings. The economic, cultural, and political impact will be tremendous. Online communities will see an influx of new users, while markets will see an influx of new consumers and businesses. Have you ever wondered why African countries and certain parts of Latin America have not built domestic internet ecosystems like Korea, Japan, China, and to a degree India? For example, Naver dwarfs Google in Korea. Line is the social network of choice in Japan, and Grab is eating Uber's lunch in Southeast Asia. These are just a few examples of local tech companies dominating market share and creating local economic value. Meanwhile, regions with a low internet penetration remain consumers of foreign tech giants, not full participants on the internet, largely because the vast majority of people are still disconnected. This makes the online market too small for serious homegrown solutions. Starlink has the potential to unlock access and create billions, perhaps trillions, in value across the developing world. This kind of impact alone can justify SpaceX and Starlink's position as one of the most important and impactful companies in the world. If we're to consider everything I've mentioned so far as soft power, it is time to move on to the hard power. Earlier, I mentioned the strategic and military importance of SpaceX by virtue of its rocket launch client list. Starlink takes this to the next level because there is no question that the internet is a major part of modern warfare. Not only is it handy for surveillance and critical frontline communication, it is also now a prerequisite for many weapon systems. Ukraine has proved to be an important testing ground for many of these capabilities. In Ukraine, Starlink has been a feature of the war from early on when Ukrainian officials requested to use it. It has been largely successful, and speeds have continued to improve. To quote Mikhailo Fedorov, Ukraine's digital minister. Quote, "Starlink is indeed the blood of our entire communication infrastructure now." End quote. This says a lot. In order to stop Russia from benefiting from the network, there has been very detailed geofencing to limit access only as far as the Ukrainian front lines. Geofencing is a process of setting a virtual geographic boundary beyond which the service stops working. This is done to a very high degree of accuracy. Updating and maintaining this geofence has necessitated an unprecedented level of frontline involvement for a private company. And the relationship is not perfect. Cracks first appeared when Elon Musk refused to allow access in certain areas of the country, including front lines near Crimea, making it essentially impossible to mount operations in that area. In essence, Starlink is playing referee in the biggest conflict in Europe since the Second World War. This capability has piqued interest from Japan and several other countries. It is also being examined by Taiwanese officials who live under constant threat of Chinese attack or sabotage. After all, China has tampered with Taiwanese undersea cables before. However, and understandably, they are wary of becoming too dependent on the company for critical defense operations. Starlink's interference has raised questions about just how much power the company has accumulated. It is almost inconceivable that Ukraine's capability to maneuver on the most sensitive frontline in the world is in the hands of a private company. As a compromise, the Pentagon has purchased a set number of satellites for extra sensitive missions outside of Starlink's purview. Of course, the US Department of Defense would like to avoid this dilemma in their own operations, so they have partnered with Starlink to create Starshield, a dedicated military network made up of modified commercial Starlink satellites. This may take Starlink out of direct battlefield decisions, but it cements the company's position as the satellite supplier of choice for the most powerful military in the world. This stamp of approval will likely have other nations lining up for similar deals. On the other hand, the New York Times reports that at least 9 countries have raised concerns with US officials about Starlink's growing influence. For this reason, China and the EU have each set aside billions of dollars to build their own commercial and military networks. Outside of war situations, Starlink is also changing the nature of protest. The recent Iranian protests were seen and heard globally because Starlink unilaterally activated in that country despite government internet shutdowns. On one hand, this signals the end of the age where dictators could shut down the internet at will. On the other hand, Starlink is now in a position where it can pick winners and losers in global and civil conflicts by deciding where and to whom it provides internet access. So, what is the significance of all this? Well, I'll let you decide. What if there was a company that could extend high-speed internet access to billions of people for the very first time? What if there was a company that could trigger trillions of dollars in economic growth? What if there was a company that was on pace to have more satellites in space than all other satellites ever sent to space by any other entity at any time? What if there was a company that had so far this year launched almost as many rockets as all other countries and companies combined? What if there was a company whose capabilities were so important that the US government paid billions to access the technology, while China and Europe sank billions of their own to play catch-up? What if there was a company that was humanity's best bet for multiplanetary existence? How significant would that be? Okay, I just wanted to say that the goal of this video was to imagine and demonstrate how important, in quotes, SpaceX could become in our lifetimes. I'm well aware of the sobering and perhaps even troubling aspects of the new age of super billionaires and their supranational companies. SpaceX is privately held. Elon Musk owns 42% of the company and controls over 70% of the voting power. That means all the unprecedented powers I have outlined ultimately rest in the hands of one man, a man who is very aware of it. Factor in his ownership of Twitter and Tesla, and we inch further into the absurd. But that is a topic for another day, and I mean that literally. I will be making a follow-up video to explore the more troubling aspects of all this. So please like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon to get notified when I post. Thanks for watching.